Welcome to another episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Our hosts, Sri Raj Gopalan, Peter V.S. Bond, and Brian Gildenberg explore how brands and retailers engage consumers in an increasingly digitally driven world. And now, here are the CPG Guys.
Hello, folks, and welcome to this episode of the CPG Guys podcast. I'm, of course, Sri, your co-host. Please do listen to my older daughter, Ria Raj's music at www.riaraj.com, R-H-E-A-R-A-J, and follow my younger daughter, Lara Raj, as a member of the Geffen Records group, Cat's Eye, while my wife, Kavita Raj, has her own podcast, Lights, Camera, Convo, on iHeartRadio and all streaming platforms. Surprise, surprise, in May, all four in the family members will have our own podcast, including Universal Music's launch, Cat's Eye Radio, for the band. Let me welcome my co-host. 4 years ago, we co-founded this podcast, which has grown into a powerful community of CPG retail commerce professionals. The partnership acceleration lead and none other than Flywheel, a division of Omnicom that helps brands bring big and small, grow their commerce businesses. Join me in welcoming my best friend, podcast co-host, Mr. Peter V.S. Bond. Game 2 at the time of this recording in the books. The Yankees are 2-0. Smacked the Astros yesterday, a good, solid gobsmacking that I enjoyed. How are you, Peter?
Well, Sri, I'm doing okay. It's a nice sunny day here in Connecticut. Just finished taking my daughter Nadia over to the trampoline indoor park. She was bouncing around for an hour and a half and managed to work a lot of energy out, and just back to record a couple episodes before I cook dinner for everybody. You know, it's just like life in the suburbs, right? Everything's good.
Wow, he had nothing to say about the Dodgers. I am in shock because Game 4 is in the books.
Didn't even look at last night's score, Sri. I have no idea how they did. I'm sure you do, but I don't.
I won't bring it up. Thanks, Peter. Before we get to our guests, we want to ask you to spread the word about this community we've created in the CPG Guys. Beyond sharing a podcast with your friends, if you're using Apple Podcasts or Spotify as your preferred listening platform, do give us a rating as it helps feed the algorithm and makes us more findable by CPG retail people like you looking for education as well as entertainment. But more importantly, it also tells us the quality of our programming. Do we have the right guests, the right conversations? So when you get a second, I know Peter likes that number, which looks like 5 different stars on it. What do you say, Peter? Is that a good aspirational benchmark?
Absolutely.
So we're happy that CPG Guys is part of an impressive collective of highly rated podcasts, including CPG Guys Fast Forward, hosted by Brian Gildenberg, CPG Scoop with Risa and Jennifer, and the FMCG Guys over in Europe across the pond, the Atlantic pond, of course, with Daniel, Efrain, and Christine. And finally, we're incredibly proud of our allyship with Next Stop, whose mission is to advance the cause of women in business and to promote gender equality in the workplace. Next Stop has terrific educational networking resources available to its members, and I, of course, serve on the board of directors leading the development committee of Next Stop. Links to our podcast, our sister cast, our landing page on Next Stop, and the social media profiles of my daughters, Ria and Laura, may be found in the digital liner notes of this episode. And so it's time to get our conversation going. And today we're going to combine the perspectives of 2 very aspirational leaders who have done big things in the CPG industry. iOPEX's, has joined us before. In fact, 2 LinkedIn Lives and a podcast with his CEO, Shiva Ramani. If you want to find the content, simply go to your Chrome browser, your Safari, whatever browser you choose to use, and just type CPG Guys space iOPEX, one word, IOPEX, and you'll find all 3 of those. iOPEX is a new generation digital services provider providing AI engineering and AI operations services. They're solution innovators focused on extracting the best out of the investments you've already made and enable bite-sized agile transformation to continuously innovate and optimize cost to book and cost to serve. And Peter and I spell bite-size as B-Y-T. I hope you like that, Peter. Join Peter and me in welcoming to the podcast none other than Naga Chakravarthy, second-time guest, and the Chief Digital Officer of iOPEX, and Joe Zawadzki, Chairman of FXM and General Partner of AperiamVventures. And I trolled Joe, and has something to do with media math as well, which I'm sure we're going to get into at some point in this podcast. Naga and Joe, pleasure to have you guys recording here with us on a Saturday. Thanks for making time. Welcome to the CPG Guys. Which corner of the globe are you each in, and how are you guys doing?
Hey, Sri and Peter. Pleasure to meet you. Thanks for having me in this show. I am out of my sunny office in California, so I'm very excited to be part of this show along with Joe. Excited to share point of view on how we both have spoken about how we need to reshape some of the things to have a better future for ad tech and operations. So thanks for having me.
Hey, everybody. I'm Joe Zawadzki here, like Peter from sunny Northeast in New York City. Delighted to be here. I realize that Naga and team are approaching third time on this. So I think they're 2 away from their varsity jacket, which would be a nice thing to be a part of.
Shri, we have to determine whether we count LinkedIn Lives towards the varsity jacket. It might actually apply here, which gives Naga a real leg up on some other people.
The fact that Joe even knows that we give away the varsity jacket for X episodes tells me, Peter, we better get our act together with that one.
I think we have a fanboy on our hands. This is great.
Dangerously close. Dangerously close.
Awesome. Welcome to both of you for the show. Naga, before we get to the questions we have prepared carefully for you, would you mind giving us a description of your role leading iOPEX? And you, of course, are operating under the strong belief that iOPEX is the merchant of disruption, aka optimizing operations, which we've talked about quite a bit on earlier LinkedIn Lives and with your CEO, the first episode we did with you, which enables people to do high order things and add to commoditized knowledge. So what's the description, man?
My role at iOPEX is twofold. Number one, building the book of business for our digital advertising and marketing services. So this is where we work with retail media clients, publishers, connected TV in terms of scaling up their operations with right scale automation, generative AI. So that's one part of the story that I deal with. And the second one obviously goes hand in hand with what I do for my customers, which is increasing our own branding within our customer reach to drive new business as a chief marketing officer.
Thanks for that, Naga. Joe, of course, you were the founder and led MediaMath for quite a while. I actually remember using MediaMath back in the days in my alma mater, PepsiCo, a while ago. You give us an overview of AperiamVventures because it appears you, of course, are looking at democratizing ad stacks as a vertical solution for walled gardens to simplify, maybe optimize, stack and scale demand and revenue for brands.
Yeah, here we go. So yeah, Mel, connected to the experience as a historically founder operator, building a lot of the platforms in the ad tech arena over a 25-year career. My partner at Aperiam, one of several, but Eric Franchi and I both began this about 6 years ago in terms of creating a dedicated fund to ad tech and martech, businesses, basically supporting kind of the next generation, both of categories and capabilities, but also entrepreneurs. And so, Aperiam is one of the few sort of dedicated funds to that endeavor. And I think one of the things that, we try to differentiate ourselves in addition to sort of providing capital to these businesses, is a little bit of the memory of what it was like to be a founder and operator of these companies. So we tend to try to provide a little bit more targeted support for those businesses, sometimes in the form of the traditional VC stuff of like, oh, you're looking for a particular role, and we've got somebody in the Rolodex that might be relevant to your sort of point there of pointing to some of the bigger market opportunities, and what are some of the tailwinds that our portfolio companies that they may be able to take advantage of. And so we try to create some opportunities for them. And one of the through lines across most of the 70 plus companies in the portfolio today is around this verticalization of advertising, that, we believe that we're in a moment of change, and, people who are regular listeners are probably feel it all around them, in terms of the convergence of advertising and commerce, in terms of changing how kind of measurement and attribution happen from cookies to a portfolio of, new solutions. And then generally, I think just an enterprising or growing up or maturing of, how all this stuff happens, given everyone's had a few cycles around the track. And our belief is that a lot of what's happened in retail media in the last, 4 or 5 years, where you have seen that sort of democratization of technology and the kind of building up of new business models in terms of traditional retailers becoming media businesses, media companies becoming marketers in and of their own right. We're seeing that same thing happen in multiple verticals now. And so, look to kind of help support that. Appreciate there's a picks and shovels opportunity for, companies in the portfolio, and for amazing next generation digital services companies like Naga's at iOPEX. And we're trying to help usher that sort of bright new future along.
How awesome. Of course, thanks for recognizing, Joe. One of the niche of the CPG guys is the convergence of media and commerce, aka the rapid ascent over the pandemic and this post-pandemic world we live in of retail media and the diverse set of services. I was looking at a report yesterday by the Mars agency. There are now 19 large-scale legitimate retail media networks of a scale. That's just scale. If you start looking at how many actually exist, there's probably 50. And the projected number of spend by 2025 is a whopping $50 billion. So those in the space, it's up to you guys to optimize it, claim your rightful territory, and make the industry a whole lot better so that when the actual ad places itself for commerce, it's in a good place to begin with in the first place. So thank you for that. And Joe, I'm going to obviously, with that sort of an intro, lead the first question with you, because we've had, as I mentioned, 2 LinkedIn Lives, 1 podcast with iOPEX's. So let's dive into AperiamVventures. You mentioned that y'all are actually in the business of managing some of those companies as well as investing, helping startup founders. I'm curious, do you miss the operating world because you ran Media Math for about a decade and a half? And then give us an introduction of AperiamVventures, your mission through AperiamVventures, what sort of portfolio companies you have invested in or are coaching, guiding, etc. And give our listeners a good understanding of democratizing ad stacks as a vertical solution for walled gardens. What does it actually mean to you? I said a lot, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so look, I kind of feel like I've got the best job I've had in my career in the sense of being a active investor, founder, and executive chairman type. I was texting somebody yesterday, said, it sounds like you've got all the good parts of the job and you left all the stressful parts of the global CEO dealing with private equity on the, in the past. And that's exactly right. You get to, I think really do the things that I think are highest value and the most rewarding. And part of me in the fund world is looking at kind of the next generation of talent that's out there that are, and a lot of serial entrepreneurs. It doesn't necessarily mean, the raw, fresh out of school startups, although love finding those people at the beginning of their journeys as well. But really being able to look at businesses and kind of having a point of view about where the industry is going and being able to map the pattern to the company in question, and sometimes seeing around a corner or two that a new entrepreneur hasn't seen or is really struggling with. And, some of the standard requests, what's the balance between technology and service? How do I navigate the agency? When do I globalize the business? How will AI begin to affect my day-to-day operations? Some of the, more current questions that are bubbling up. And, you have the benefit of being able to rely on both history and then an active network to be able to, answer some of those questions. The part I find almost as fun, though, is when kind of the new ideas are challenging your priors, right? And I think it's the wisdom is not in one direction. It's also hearing what's happening, because a lot of us were sort of, disruptors at the beginning, too, and approaching the industry and being like, I kind of understand how it works, but I have no idea why, and it shouldn't work like that. And let me come up and rethink it. And I think you have to remember some of that willingness to sort of challenge the status quo in your own self and be like, I don't know, this is the way it's happened in the last 20 years, but there's no guarantee that it should for the next 20. So where am I wrong? And I think that, sort of keeps you fresh, keeps you humble, keeps it nimble. And so I love that part of the role. Part of the, maybe on the second part of the kind of the walled gardens, and what we're seeing in this kind of new verticalization opportunity speaks to that a little bit, right? In that I spent enough time on the, particularly on the demand side with both brands and agencies, and then obviously navigating the proverbial Lumascape, the kind of complexity of a pretty fast moving set of individual capabilities. And the challenge in a lot of cases is that those individual capabilities left to their own devices has to compete with lots of other good ideas. Right. And so you come up with a novel, creative solution or personalization solution, or you come up with, a new approach for insights and analytics, or a new channel gets developed, podcast advertising by one of our portfolio companies, Red Circle. And everything's in a competition of ideas and attention, particularly when you're focused in the enterprise and call it the Fortune 2000. And so, one of the things that we've been encouraging the portfolio to think about is, are there bigger themes? Are there bigger trends that as a collective you can get behind? And if you can hold up sort of a strategic direction for a marketer or a vertical, and again, this is where, a little bit where we're going, you can basically create enough momentum behind kind of a shared destination that if you can partner together in order to pursue it, it happens faster. It's good for you because it opens up, incremental demand. It creates more visibility for what you're trying to solve for. And this verticalization is one of those. Like, I think enough people have seen the benefits of retailers and CPG companies realizing that they have more in common with each other than either of them do with Google and Meta, for example, right? And it's like, look, if we really want to do this well, a retailer is going to have to open up access in a curated, careful, thoughtful way to their core customers and make it easier for CPGs and manufacturers to, get access to that in the way that they've been asking for to some extent for decades. And you're in this moment right now where you're like, oh, you can create these commercial and technological collaborations between companies where they're more alike, again, than they are different. And there's partnership opportunities that didn't exist even 5 years ago, right? I was on with Mark Benito, Peter, just before, like literally 5 minutes before this podcast began. And for us, in a lot of ways, this is back to the future. Some of the things that we were talking about 15 years ago are now happening in real life. And what Naga and I have been spending a lot of time on is, one, supporting it in core retail, because there is a strong belief that there is a retail media 2.0 that is important, right? Enough is changing that almost redesigning it, and as much of the benefits of the 35 RMNs that you referenced, and I think in real life we may be at 150 if you zoomed up globally. Those are wonderful things, but then you have a lot of companies that are saying, you know what, 2 and 3 and 5 were great. 55 was maybe too many. 150 is really hard to navigate. And, what do I do now? So I think there's a little bit of a appetite now for, fragmentation, but then rationalization at the same time. Like, what are the things that need to be common across those things, just so I, as a brand, can, communicate my intent across all of those distributed platforms. And then a last rant on this one, and then it was a long question, so I'm allowed a really long answer, is the phase 2 of it is like, if you've lived that experience of retail media 1.0, seen the benefits and seen the flaws, it's a little bit like the CDMA 3G, 4G, 5G. If you haven't installed one of those vertical ecosystems or vertical stacks before, don't start as if you didn't see the retail media experience. Start with the benefit of knowledge about how this plays out and basically snap to grid, roll out the 5G vertical stack. Today, if you're focused on B2B, or you're focused on pharma, or you're focused on gaming and entertainment, and that's basically the work that iOPEX's and broader Aperiam portfolio have been engaged in, is, hey, can we create sort of a modern roadmap, a modern playbook for how to do this sort of at scale across multiple verticals? You can tell it's very exciting stuff on a Saturday afternoon, no less.
Joe, Naga, welcome to the podcast. Joe, I think you hit on something that has me up at night, which is this massive fragmentation. There is too much for CPG manufacturers to handle. And if retailers, I understand why they all got into retail media. The margin is very alluring, but the problem is it's not about the margin. It's, at the end of the day, are you bringing in the revenue? And if the juice isn't worth the squeeze, then that lovely retail media platform that you've invested against isn't going to produce any bankable money. But we'll discuss that a little bit later. Naga.
But Peter, before you ask that question, how much of this is a game of patience, though? Not everyone was created equal. There's maybe 5 to 7 who have the muscle and the strength now, but
I agree.
With a 24-month patience period, I'm actually pretty sure that's not everyone, but 2/3, 75% of the RMN ecosystem will actually beef up capabilities because it's a profit center.
Well, it's one thing about capabilities. I think a lot of them have capabilities either built in case of the big people or bought in case of the ones that are working with a series of third-party partners. The challenge is just more scale, right? These small players, until they can plug into an ecosystem that provides scale and allows a manufacturer to invest against them, not as a standalone, but as part of a broader geographic investment strategy. Because I think we've talked about this, Sri. It takes just as much time to execute a retail media campaign for a retailer that has 100 stores as it does for one that has 10,000 stores. So where are you going to spend your time? You're going to spend it where the scale is. And that's why that fragmentation has to be addressed. If some of these, I'm not saying that like super regional and regional retailers aren't very important. They are highly trusted by their consumers. But the problem is the manufacturers, the question is the juice worth the squeeze? And until they can make it easier and take the friction out, I think there's a lot of issues, but we can discuss that a little later. Naga, my question to you is, within the role of activities that you have at iOPEX, where does that fit into this partnership with AperiamVventures? I'd love to hear how you connect with what they're doing and how their skill set is bringing some clarity to the work that you're doing with your clients.
Absolutely, Peter. I'd love to answer this question in two parts. First is more a philosophical thing. I think coming from a very strong belief that we should be bold enough to cannibalize our own business, right? I think for that, you need to actually embrace and have partnership with people who are dreaming big and be bold to make changes. So in line to that, the multiple sets of tool sets that Aperiam is trying to build to clear the clutter that is in the market is one of the important aspects that naturally dragged me towards Joe. I think our relationship was at least 15, 16 years back when he was really doing very well in media math. And our relationship started there and we continued our relationship. And probably at one point in time when we converged and when he came to know what we are doing and I came to know what he was doing, it was absolutely a natural fit. And I mean, it resonated. The name iOPEX actually resonated and his philosophy absolutely resonated. And we said, hey, why could we not put something together? And I think you come from a very strong operations background. I mean, I have built multiple ad techs. I think somewhere we need to combine this together and the vertical space or the verticalizing the entire advertising technology for retailers, for commerce intermediaries, for anybody who has first-party data, who is dreaming that they wanted to build a wall garden and drive responsible advertising, it could be a great combination, we thought. Right? So philosophically, it was absolutely aligning to what we wanted to do. And the second thing is, as an operator, right, you will have nuances of how the operation gets executed. For example, if you wanted to stand up advertising as a business, considering you have very, very rich first-party data, you need a technology operations, which means you need to fit multiple technologies together so that your demand, supply, your trust, brand safety, everything puts in together. That actually falls very well within our wheelhouse of what we do as operations, but we need to be having some smart and cool technologies. And right from starting an advertising business, it's all about fitting the right technology. You need to have a good sales operations. You need to have a good revenue operations. So all of this basically means that, you take a technology and how does that technology weaves deep inside the operation so that you actually run a very optimized book of business. And that's what we do for a living, right? So the fact that nicely resonated, and how could you then amplify what you are doing in your operations with smart toolkits, right? That's going to further optimize your operations, right? So that also became a compulsive story for us to start looking at multiple toolkits that you need to basically deploy, horses for courses, you can call it, right? One retail media need not use the same tool that the other retail media is using because they wanted to operate in very different ways. So as a commerce intermediary. So you need to bring that variation because we don't believe in one size fit for all solution. You need to really understand the nuances of the uniqueness that each and every first party data that they wanted to build a wall garden need to have. And then you need to provide that operational support for them. So that actually fell very, very nicely. And I think our journey just started. And, I would say the first discussion about doing something like this was for a very unique company that really wanted to convert their first party data and start using their app as an advertising via Medium. So absolutely the story was very well received. And hopefully, our joint venture should be able to have that first crack in. And with that victory, I think we should be able to replicate it across the globe is what we feel.
Fabulous. Well said. Joe, I'm going to go where no man should dare to go. I'm just kidding. We spoke to proliferation of retail media, right? So I'd love to hear from you, Joe, your point of view. This crazy growth we've had in retail media where maybe five have the superpowers of muscle, commerce intermediaries we're seeing left and right, and specialized verticals adopting advertising as a revenue stream. What's your recommendation, having been in this space for as long as you have? How should they build scale? Like five have muscle, you refer to over 50, maybe over 150. What should the balance 145 do?
Yeah, it's funny. It's a natural build to this whole conversation, actually, if we were to, go cycle through. Like the impetus for why it's happening is obvious from both sides, right? Let's just say that from the CPG perspective, it's been the holy grail, right? How do I connect to consumers where they're at the point of purchase, whether that's physical or that's e-commerce, right? And if I used to do it through, end caps and signage and through co-op and shopper marketing promotion, et cetera, if I can make that a digital connection, if I can make it a real-time connection, we can sort of partner in that way. That's what I've been trying to do for, that's Wanamaker. Literally, it was a shopping center, the department store mall that was, starting to ask the question about how do I connect to my advertising.
I think it's actually now a Wegmans in Lower Manhattan.
Yes.
There you go. And funnily enough, the only time I bought anything from that Wegmans was on Instacart, which is kind of amazing. In any case, why do retailers want to do it? Well, they all looked at what was happening with Amazon and then, quickly with Target, Walmart, and I think it was in that order, and said, boy, my core business is red in tooth and claw. I make a little bit on my GMV, but it seems like these ads businesses are super high growth and wildly profitable. And boy, does that seem like a nice way to sort of supercharge my P&L. And then, of course, there became quickly a proliferation of them. The point of how you build, how you buy, how you partner has kind of led to some of this fragmentation. And now you kind of do, I think, have, brands kind of asking for, again, some rationalization of this. It, funnily enough, is exactly the situation of media, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, right? And you had the rise of DSPs and SSPs basically as a way to manage what was a bunch of theoretical connections to a bunch of different publishers, but no real way to aggregate those things sort of at scale, such that you could push a button and have things change across all of these different sort of independent kind of media properties all at once. And so I think you're going to end up in that same place, and Naga sort of touched on it. It's a little bit of the model house, right? Every family is different, every family is the same. Right. Most houses have kitchens. Most houses have plugs low to the ground as opposed to high up. There's some basics that exist. And so I do believe that you can have a reference architecture that sort of says this is what is best in class across the board. And then, of course, you've got to bring your own customization to bear. And then I think there's an opportunity to really be thoughtful, not just on the tech stack, but again, where I got excited about iOPEX in particular was rethinking the service stack. Right? Because what you have in a lot of cases is like the tech stack, I hate to say it, is kind of the easy part. And remember, I'm the purveyor of the tech stack. So I'm sharing this with, real candor. In a lot of cases, it's like, okay, how do I get a business off the ground from a first revenue, right? How do I make what is now a crowded field feel differentiated with my new offering? Right? How do I bring it to a brand that feels endemic and is willing to invest the time to go and develop what is a new media property, build my case study, help me build a process to bring it to the agencies that might care for similarly situated advertisers to, test this thing out at scale? How do I explore non-endemic advertisers? And that's a lot of the benefit, right? So people that aren't spending with me today in my store or elsewise, how can I deliver a property that appeals to them? So it's a lot of it in the go-to-market and in the positioning and basically how to get the flywheel spinning, hey, sorry, pun intended, on the front end. And then the staffing of same, right? Because a lot of these organizations, this is another one of the areas where the fragmentation comes to bear, is a lot of people, like, there aren't that many people that have this depth of sort of knowledge and experience in the industry. And if you have to full stack, have them show up in every company that's launching a media business in every vertical across the world, I mean, this is a full employment plan for anybody in the marketing and advertising industry for sure. But it's also, there's like 5 times potentially as many opportunities as there are, people. And so the ability to flexibly say, all right, even on from a talent perspective, what do you need to own? What do you need to rent? What do you need to have scaffolding in place today through an agency, through a service provider, et cetera, that you might well then staff directly over time. But if you can help guide an organization from, gleam in the eye to a scaled business over a 2 to 3 year ramp up using the full set of capabilities of sort of talented organizations that are out there, you can just get there much more quickly. And I love, Naga mentioned at the beginning of this too, what I really appreciate about them was their willingness to creatively disrupt their own business, right? So we went out there to a couple of shared cases where we were involved on the tech side and they were involved on the service side, kind of independently. This is the pre 1 + 1 = 3, but knew that they were out there basically saying, hey, we're charging right now X%. And what we're going, for our services, and what we're going to do is commit through AI and through automation to have our economics and to be able to be willing to disrupt one's own business in that way. I just was like, oh, certainly a kindred spirit, right? It's in a lot of organizations, like the disruption is for thee, but not for me. And I think these guys are like, no. Like if we're bringing the theory of disruption to companies and more rational ways of doing things, we better have the lens turned on ourselves as well. So anyway, we're excited with where we are here.
We got to immortalize that, Peter. Disruption is for thee, but not for me. Love that. I'll repeat it often now. With your permission, of course, Joe.
Please. Attribution half the time feels about right.
Shri, I sense a new T-shirt quote coming on.
Joe, do not be surprised if in the industry you see a CPG Guys shirt, disruption is for thee, but not from me, quote unquote, Josie.
There you go.
That would be an honor.
So Naga, obviously coming from a strong operations optimization background, how do you see iOPEX really with your solutions and how they can augment this space, adding value to retail media, commerce intermediaries, and specialized verticals that are adopting advertising? What's the real core value that you see adding to this ecosystem?
So I'll take a step back before answering this question. Right? If you look at any segment growth, right, or any new growth, I broadly classify those kind of growth into three steps that it takes. One is the ramp up stage, right? Getting things bootstrapping, understanding what's in the market. Sometimes the speed to market is a very important aspect. You will throw everything at it, right? So that one I call it as first phase, right? You'll suddenly get some crazy revenue in, and then finally when you start looking at the P&L, oh wow, oh God, I did everything, but you know what? My margins are very bad or poor. I need to improve, right? But that's a good thing that you need to do because speed to market is very, very important. You'll try to capture a lot of things. And the second important phase is consistent outcomes, right? That's when you will start streamlining a lot of things, processes, tools, technologies, and how can you drive consistent outcome? And finally, you will start looking at how do I optimize my business to consistently have better EBITDA so that I shine like a star in the market or I shine like a star in the street, right? So those are the three important phases that any business would go through, and we clearly understand that point. And our goal is to completely align to that. So what it means is the initial stage, it's all about, going with the flow, maybe making sure that we collaborate with the retail media guys, commerce intermediary guys in terms of providing scale, right? So you got to basically make them faster to the market in their own niche. So how could you right skill them in terms of building an operation that can actually support the revenue inflow that they have? They need to have an absolute spick and span fulfillment engine, right? That's the first focus that we have. The second thing is we know that we are ramping up fast. We know that, there are a lot of operational inefficiency inherently gets built. The second piece of the puzzle that we bring onto the table is how do you stop and start looking at optimizing? So which means we will start challenging the status quo, saying, if they say, hey, I need another 50 people to be ramped up because we are opening something in the new market, we will come back and say, why would you need 50? Why could we not use a tool? Or why could you not figure out that these are repetitive steps in nature? Why could we not automate? Can't we not use AI? Because that's the brake that a partner would apply. If you are a vendor, you will never apply that brake. You will keep accepting until somebody applies the brakes on you, right? And the third is, along with them, how could you drive innovation? That's where you will start looking at, how could you start optimizing the EBITDA for that business? So then it could be full scale integration of systems. It could be complete automation of process, or can you use Gen AI, right? With all of these three things coming together, that's what anybody who's starting a new business wants to have a partnership with, right? This is something that we consider as a core formula. And the fact that, we are very bold in terms of doing this, calling it out. Initially, it might be, taken as, hey, is it the right thing to do? But once the partner gets it, then it's absolutely a journey. And then it's a vicious cycle. Probably they're starting a business A, it could be retail media, right? For all that, let's say on a different parallel, they totally starting a truly different business. This model will succeed there as well. So which means that I would be able to take this model and be a partner there as well. That's the kind of envisioned growth that we have. And with this, we are able to nicely fit into any industry or anything that can actually drive growth. So that's, the long story short, I would say the optimal operation and then start using automation, Gen AI is natural within the way that we want it to deliver. And today it is automation, it is Gen AI, tomorrow it could be anything, right? So we're very bold to embrace those kind of technology. Net, we know that we are a cool operator. In order to make sure that we operate well, we have to continuously improve. And when you do that, you will be able to attach to any form of business.
He went there, Peter. He had to mention Gen AI. How can I be silent now? But in any event, let me give a reminder to our audience that we're speaking with Naga Chakravarthy, CDO of iOPEX's, and Joe Zawadzki, partner at AperiamVventures and former founder of MediaMath. Joe, the advertising world, cookie crumbling, 2 years delayed but real now, and strong first-party-based data walled gardens emerging. Is it not too much of brands and CPG to handle when it comes to advertising? Love to hear your views on two things. How should CPG or brands streamline the media mix? And has the media mix, or let's say the MMM, flipped on its head? Should it?
Deep and profound questions. So, yeah, and I love that you twinned them, actually, because people keep them separate in their heads. And in fact, they're two sides of the same coin, or they should be. Look, I think that to some extent, the cookie crumbling is a little bit anticlimactic. Like, it's been crumbled for most marketers for a while, right? Mobile for 4 years, CTV never had it. Certainly print and linear didn't, and yet somehow people were doing, data-driven marketing for a long time, right? So, it has been a crutch in what people normally think of digital, and one that, if you're close to it, you've like, oh, that's been broken forever. Not just fragmented, but actually the applications of it, right? I think people got hooked on metrics for a hot second and then started doing things like click-through rates or proxy to performance. And it kind of led to a relatively immature MMM and MTA attribution environment as well, because there was an illusion of quantification without necessarily having rigor behind it, and certainly not to the level of people using it, in real time in order to make allocation decisions on the front end, right? So fragmentation of metrics, every one of them broken in some way, but none of them broken enough to warrant the wholesale change that an outcomes first mentality would demand. And it was in the context of a CMO job that was also changing from spender of money to driver of outcomes, from, a person close to the center of gravity to, done right, that could be the growth engine of a business and might be a reasonable facsimile to the CEOs of companies, right? So long and short of it is, it kind of is like long overdue, and delighted that the, cookie, everyone's like, yep, it's actually crumbling, and now let's do something about it, right? So at that moment, then like, what do you do about it? And I think there's a front-end rationalization and then a back-end quantification, both of which are necessary at the same moment. the back end is basically like, okay, if I can't measure anything reliably and my old metrics don't work, let me kind of do it right. And you're starting to see some sit on the, actually, Naga and I are both on the board of the MMA. ANA certainly has this. The WFA, is putting time in on the outside of North America. But you are seeing this like real embrace of measurement and attribution as a thing that people have to do now, right? Not as a thought experiment or an academic exercise, but like, okay, like I actually need this for my job. And so I'm seeing, and again, there's a sample bias to who we're talking to, right? So these are fellow board members of brands who are doing things like contributing their log level data to shared benchmarking insights or commissioning MMM or MTA work by third parties, right? So bear with me on this, in that the group is the 20% of the market that are leading, not fast following. But if you look at that group, they're doing it, right? So, which by the way, 5 years ago, they weren't. And so you're seeing a change at that level. So now you're basically seeing people saying, okay, I actually I'm going to start with the finish line, and then I'm going to project force outwards, right? I'm going to, not take media inputs. And again, I'm going to betray my own bias in terms of how I, think about the world. But a lot of marketers think about media in, right? And they're trying to filter, they're trying to sort, they're trying to make sense based on what the media has told them. And how do you compare against, Google versus Meta versus programmatic or open web? How do I compare those metrics to the reach and frequency metrics that I might have grown up with, and et cetera? But it's all outward in. And I think there is a moment where the smart marketers are like, no. Like, let me go in out. Like, let me start with the finish line, start with truth, start with sales, start with conversions, start with customer value, and then let me work to connect the inputs to that outcome measures, right? So that's sort of, trend number one. The second trend, if you want to pull that off, right, another area that a lot of the earlier champions of sort of measurement failed was, well, two failure modes, right? One is eyes bigger than stomach or reach exceeding grasp. Right, they would get involved in some of these measurement exercises, and it would be like, well, one more thing, let me connect one more thing, let me do one more thing. And you'd have, 12 to 18 months of build, at which point you'd have credenzaware. You'd have a really nice PowerPoint that couldn't do anything, right? And then a bunch of people get fired, and then you wouldn't do it again. And you were back to the last touch, in most of your channels. And people just listening won't appreciate the sympathetic nodding I'm getting from the rest of the group here. Like, that is a lived experience for many of us.
I wasn't nodding, Joe. I was actually laughing because it was reality.
Right? It's a thing. And so, then what you need to do is now connect. You have to instrument your inputs to be able to accept the output of your model. Right? And so, another area that I'm, continually passionate about is what's the abstraction layer? What's the software, the service layer that brings all that stuff together, not for the sake of doing it, like not necessarily just in a dashboard to be able to see it, but to be able to take the output of a model and be able to change the media inputs at the front end. And that's true across the board, right? That'll be true in walled gardens. That's true in, the fragmentation of the curated gardens. It's true in open web. But so much is changing in runtime right now that we're finally at the point where you've got, the 10% or 15% of the market that is positive disruptors will get to the other side. And then everyone else will sort of fast follow. And, we're there. Some of the people actually, I'm sure you may know, like I've got Byron Sharp's book sitting on my bookshelf. I haven't reread it, but I'm committed to doing it. Maybe I need to get it in Audible. But in any case, there is like this cadre of CMOs. It's like, look, we're just going to, as part of the changing of my job, I'm going to change the infrastructure of the world around me. And those are, I think, are the favorite people for us to talk to. I won't call them out here, but Vinny, you know who you are.
All righty then. So Naga, I guess Joe certainly has. Joe, you have opinions. That's great. I like that. Strong opinions. But Naga, I want to hear from you. What's your take on how you view these operational challenges in the verticals, and what are the right solutions and approach guidance for companies that are trying to build a meaningful, sustainable, growing retail media network using this first-party data that will resonate with advertisers and ultimately generate value for both the retailer and the brands, endemic and non-endemic, that are advertising on them?
Great question. I'm going to wear two hats and answer. The first hat that I'm going to wear is as a marketer. exciting, very exciting, because the traditional media mix model is going to get redefined, right? The traditional media is print, television, digital. But I don't know, how to break this. I'm still struggling in my mind as to how to break this, right? Should I call within advertising into 5 or 6 segments, or should I negate some of the traditional segment and build new segment? Still, it's up in the air. Exciting, but one of the important thing that as a marketer that I think that I boldly wanted to have an opinion is I should have control on the data, right? Whether I am doing it on print, whether I'm doing it on television, whether I'm doing it on connected TV, whether I'm doing it on retail media. I think with compute power so cheap, with the data lakes coming in no time, and with generative AI compounding that to find out what should I do, when should I do, how should I do, so that I could have a predictable media mix model. That infrastructure is something as a marketer that though I rely on multiple people to do things and provide inputs to me, I should have control on my own destiny, right? That is what I think as a marketer, because that's going to make me make the most right choices for my brand, because I know who's going to buy, because I know my audience, right? I know who's going to drop out for what reasons, right? If I know every bit of it from an user experience journey, and that user experience journey, as Joe said, knowing your finish line and then coming back, I think data is going to play an important part, right? How do you kind of corroborate the tribal knowledge that actually stays in different parts? How do you bring this as what I call this as a brand marketer long-term memory, so that you could start figuring out what you need for the future, right? That's the bold move. So which means, every brand marketer should start looking at, can I have my own AI practice, corroborating all those data, apply Gen AI and start asking the right question, because all you need to do is once you have the data, you need to know how to prompt it, right? So that's one angle that I would say. The second angle, is more coming from an operator, where I would be sitting on the side of a retail media company, or I will be sitting on the side of a commerce intermediary, right? What I need to start thinking about it is, while everybody is thinking about growing their revenue, what kind of insights that I need to provide, right? So I don't want to just be an operator, right? The fact that I'm an operator, I know the nuances of every brand. Where are they spending? How is the customer journey converting it into a conversion or an acquisition or an add to a basket, right? And I need to be super strong as an operator to start understanding the data part of it. So that's where I think as an operator, we should be proactively pushing something called as measurements and insights, and you should be able to provide analytical angle for every single campaign that is being run. Like today, if you look at it in any large publishers or any large retail media, anybody who's spending big, you tend to spend and actually know how much is their spending, and then you'll start providing measurement insights for large brands. But I think you need to also look at how you need to provide for the mid-market and the long tail. Once you do that, you will start getting that incremental revenue that is being spent on your platform. And that's going to have a huge impact, because advertising is not just for larger brands. Advertising is for everybody. That is what I call it as truly democratizing. And I think we are looking at, as an operator, how would you give that power for the retail media platform, for the commerce intermediaries to democratize so that everybody can responsibly advertise in their platform? That's the two-hat answer from my side, Peter.
Very deeply thought answer, Naga. And the last question on the CPG Guys is a segment we call Fast Forward. In 60 seconds, each of you give us what excites you about the future in this advertising retail media space. Joe, let's do shotgun you first. What excites you about this space?
I think that people are finally going to go from, theory to practice, thought to deed. It's happening, right? And I remember we were there at the beginning of some of the Macy's and the Rondells and the, Home Depots and, back before the category had a name, and you were touching around reach extension and audience. The elements of this were, happening. And I know it's frustrating for brands. I appreciate that the fragmentation is challenging. At the same time, it's what everyone's been asking for generations, like human generations. And so it's a little like, okay, deal with the first iPhone, first Palm Pilots weren't necessarily a lot better than, pieces of paper, right? But they did show you the way. and here we are, right? And obviously we're much more mature than that. But point being, like, the fact that it's happening is kind of amazing. And the fact that it will become, ubiquitous in the industry. In fact, it's the only way forward, right? I think that's it should be extremely empowering for a lot of the people in the industry to just appreciate that they are at the forefront of as much change as they are and take a little bit of appreciation and credit for it.
The only thing, Joe, I would say is all that is 100% true. It creates excitement as long as your statement transformation is not something holding brands back, because this is transformation at its absolute best. The examples you gave of the Palm Pilot, etc. Naga, what about you, man? 60 seconds. What excites you in this space?
I think the transformation of using the data to take decision very quickly is really one excitement that I'm really fond of, because it's going to help everybody, right? Once you have data and then you have the right interpretation and it is aiding you to make some cool decisions, and then thanks to compute power, thanks to a lot of AI that compounds it, that is something that I definitely is very, very excited. And the second thing is the way different first-party data collectors are trying to run their business and how are they trying to find a niche for themselves is actually helping operators like us to start looking at and exploring what is the best way to run their business, right? So those two things is definitely something that, it keeps me excited. So when I hear a media network comes out, right? Or when I see a new commerce intermediary says, I'm going to run this form of business, it kind of excites me and says, how are they actually going to grow to the next phase of the business, right? So the ever-changing model in the way business are being conducted, and I think advertising is going to be an evergreen area, but I think data, being responsible and making sure that you don't hurt the customer experience, that's going to be an important part, but the changes around that is absolutely exciting me.
I love that you went in the direction of dynamic decision making. I personally, over my 28-year career in CPG, some of the absolute largest brands in the world, PepsiCo, Frito, Johnson & Johnson, Revlon, you name it, have made statements all my life. Hey, we're like a battleship. It takes us 24 hours to make a turn. And if you get that down to a smooth speedboat that can make a turn in about, I won't say 5 seconds, but maybe 60, so we have stability, that's a major seismic shift in operating and making things just better for the consumer. So I look forward to that day sincerely. Let me remind our audience that you can find all of our content on the website, cpgguys.com. That's simple. And if you think you or your company has thought leadership to contribute to a community discussion, simply send us an email at contact@cpgguys.com. That's easy, contact@cpgguys.com. Maybe you can join us on the podcast. Don't forget to drop us a rating on cpgguys.com on the navigation bar up top. That tells us about the quality of our programming, the conversations we have, and the guests that we have. To our LinkedIn, 30K plus followers, we're nobody without you. For the DMs, messages, link, clicks, likes, comments, daily engagement, telling us who to bring on the show, referrals, we are eternally thankful. We know that's a big number, and I want to say it again. You make this show. Naga and Joe, thank you for joining us on a Saturday afternoon.
Ton of fun.
It was a pleasure to host you both. Peter, what did we learn today?
Well, first of all, my head's still spinning because the minute he mentioned Palm Pilot, it took me back 24 years. I was down in Rahway, New Jersey, doing some consulting work for a box and ship e-grocer called NetGrocer. And every time I wanted to check my email, I had to step outside of the warehouse door and connect my Palm Pilot to my Sky Cradle and access the cell network to try and download some very simplistic emails, and how life has changed.
I kid you not, I used it so much it changed my orthography. So I stopped using the cross on the top of T's. It just became this.
I'm not surprised, but Shri, this episode was so chock full of information. I don't know if my summary can do it justice. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. What I heard from Joe is Aperiam is really elevating ventures through expertise and innovation. And what he likes is when new ideas challenge prior conceptions, causing vertical disruption, which ultimately leads to opportunity. And he said one of the things that really kind of appealed to him about working with iOPEX's is their willingness to be bold enough to cannibalize your own business. I heard very loudly that fragmentation is a big issue, that both of these players are trying to help RMNs looking to make a sustainable business, trying to address. That means, Aperiam's building really great tools that help clear out the clutter in the market and has been a real catalyst for iOPEX's partnership with them. At the end of the day, they're trying to say, listen, anyone who has first-party data and wants to build a walled or even a hedged garden for responsible advertising really should be working with iOPEX and Aperiam, because they are going to help them move through this ecosystem, right? I heard Naga talk about you need to have speed to market, you need to focus on consistent outcomes, and you need to be optimizing the capabilities to drive EBITDA. Those are all critical success, and that's why iOPEX is completely aligned against that. I heard Joe say, build your RMN with an outcome-first mentality, right? You need to change from this media in perspective to an inward out perspective, taking the output of the model and ultimately changing the media inputs. And at the end of the day, delivering insights for all brands, not just the big scaled brands, are going to enable retail media networks to capture the full value of the platform through broader CPG investments. It's going to be better for them, better for the brands, and ultimately better for the customers who are going to get stronger experiences because they're going to get relevant messages that help them make meaningful purchases. So all about that. I'm just amazed at this conversation. My head's still spinning. I'm probably going to listen to this episode 3 or 4 times to try and capture so much more that I missed even in my brief summary. But those are my thoughts, Shri.
Thank you for that, Peter. A couple of follow-ups for you and me. We're going to have to figure out this varsity jacket situation for Joe now.
Oh, God. Now it's, a certain retail media network leader based out of Boise, Idaho she's going to start weighing in on this. Like, when do I get my jacket? Everybody wants
Fair enough. She's awfully close to the 4.
I know. She's very close.
And the other one is, don't be surprised, coming soon to a theater near you. The famous quote t-shirt from Joe. That one is happening. I can see that already. So thank you to everybody for listening in. See you soon on another episode of the CPG Guys.
The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPG Guys LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPG Guys LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPG Guys LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPG Guys LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.